How would you define holistic science, and what the main point is that you try to communicate to your students, and the main learning experience, the components of the Masters in Holistic Science?
Well, one way of looking at it, there are many ways of answering that question. There isn't one answer, basically, but one answer might be that it's to do with an approach to the world that is not just about thinking, but that incorporates thinking into intuition, our sensory experience, and an ethical response to the world. Or if you want to put it differently, it's a kind of science which recognises that ethics is built into the very structure of nature. And it's not as if nature is this dead mechanical backdrop that we thought it was up until the beginning of the 20th century in science. That it's actually, it has an ethics deep within it which can communicate itself to us. In other words, that nature is actually sentient, and that we're able to learn and participate with this sentience in nature through our thinking minds, through our intellects, which we mustn't reject, but just as much and just as importantly through our ethics, our feeling, that is, through our sensory experience, and through our intuition. So it's a combination, holistic science is a combination of using those four ways of knowing in ourselves in developing a participatory relationship with the world.
And you, in your recent book, The Animate Earth, you tie the scientific information of Gaia theory in with aspects of deep ecology and also of Jungian psychology. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah.
How you see them connect?
Well, it's again using that fourfold model which I outlined just now, which comes from Jung. Thinking, feeling, sensing and intuition. And in science we just use thinking. In conventional science we just use thinking and that's it. The others are more or less disregarded, or they're faintly acknowledged, if at all. But in that book, what I try to do is take the scientific information and re-ensoul it, literally reanimate it, bring soul back in to the scientific descriptions of Gaian cycles, such as the carbon cycle or the sulfur cycle, by speaking of the actors in the feedback loops as personalities, not as if they were personalities, but actually as persons, in some broader sense of what we mean by person, as sentient creatures that are capable of experience. So carbon atoms have a personality, oxygen atoms have personalities, the great ecosystems have personalities and qualities. So I try to describe some of the standard scientific accounts of Gaian feedback loops from that perspective.
And where do you see the enrichment in when you speak about nature in that way? Well, what does it do to people and to people's understanding?
Well, you see, it can develop a very strong sense of participation, and it's holistic in the sense that it doesn't reject any way of knowing. I mean, the tendency is either to stay with the rational completely and reject the others, which gives you a partial understanding, or to go with feeling or intuition or sensing and reject the intellect, which gives you another partial understanding. What we're trying to do here is bring those two sides together, the quantities and the qualities, the facts and the values, the culture and nature, these dichotomies we have created in our culture since the scientific revolution, and bring them together. And I find that when we work like this with students who are studying Gaia, or science generally, a tremendous sense of participation in the world can happen. In fact, one way I put it is that students or people can be Gaiaed by the very personality of the Earth. So it's not as if the Earth is alive. It's not as if the Earth, in this understanding, actually is alive, and actually is a psychological presence, actually does have a soul. And this ensouled quality of the Earth, this agency in the Earth, can sweep through your consciousness and open it up and broaden it out and inspire it and embed you deeply within itself. And I think this is what we need to discover if we're going to move towards genuine sustainability. Otherwise all our efforts to become sustainable won't work, because they'll be founded on the wrong perspective. And of course this perspective that I'm talking about is nothing new. It goes way back into the roots of our own culture, and we see it in, I think I could say, in all tribal traditional indigenous cultures, this notion that the earth or whole of nature is an animate being is really a primordial way of seeing the world, which I think we in our culture need to rediscover.
And we are part of that being.
Completely part of it, yeah.
So how does our psychology relate to, like, you've also been quite strongly influenced by Annes and the deep ecologists. Where do you see the link to your work now from that influence? And
well, deep ecology, I think, is about experience, fundamentally, about a deep experience of the sentience of the world. This is how I would put it. It's not how Annes would put it, but it's how I put it. Deep ecology is about a deep experience of the sentient nature of the world. So Arnie Ness would say things like, I'm not going to the mountains, I'm going to be with the mountains. So he would go to his mountain hut in Norway and just be with the mountains. By that he means he would absorb the wisdom of the mountains, be taught by the mountains. And this is a deep experience of deep connectedness. And then in deep ecology we go further than that. We then say, okay, how can we live our lives in accordance with that deep experience? And then the more rational aspect comes in, and we begin to deeply question our lifestyles in relation to that deep experience. And then we act. Having deeply questioned how we're living, we then act. And it becomes a kind of hermeneutic circle. These three things are connected with each other, and you get a increasing depth of experience, of questioning and commitment. And so the work with Animate Earth that I was doing in that book is really trying to use the science to drive that depth and that deepening.
And